The morning mist hung low over the grounds of Windsor Castle as guard Thomas Mitchell adjusted his red uniform for what he thought would be another routine day. At 26 years old, Thomas had been serving as a Queen's Guard for 3 years, following in the footsteps of his father and grandfather, who had both worn the same scarlet tunic with pride. His family had a long tradition of military service, and Thomas considered his position not just a job, but a sacred duty to protect the royal family. Thomas came from a working-class family in Manchester. His father, Robert Mitchell, had served as a guard for 25 years before retiring with honor. His mother, Sarah, worked as a nurse at the local hospital, often pulling double shifts to help support the family. Thomas had 2 younger sisters, Emma and Lucy, both studying at university thanks to the sacrifices their parents had made. The Mitchell family understood the value of hard work, respect, and dignity in everything they did. That particular Tuesday morning started like any other. Thomas arrived at the castle at 5:30 in the morning, went through his usual preparations, and took his position at the main entrance. He had been assigned to this post for several months and knew the routine by heart. Stand perfectly still, eyes forward, maintain complete composure no matter what happened around him. The tourists would come, take pictures, sometimes try to make him laugh or move, but Thomas remained as steady as a statue. The Queen's Guards were famous throughout the world for their discipline and unchanging expressions. Thomas took this responsibility seriously. He had trained for months to perfect his stance, his breathing, his ability to remain motionless for hours at a time. It was not just about looking impressive for visitors, it was about representing the best of British military tradition and showing respect for the crown. As the morning progressed, Thomas noticed the usual flow of visitors and staff members moving around the castle grounds. Tour groups gathered nearby, guides explaining the history of the guards and their important role in protecting the royal family. Children pointed and stared with wide eyes at his tall black hat and shiny boots. Thomas had grown used to being treated more like a tourist attraction than a person, but he understood it was part of his duty. Around 10:30 in the morning, Thomas saw Queen Camilla approaching with her small group of personal staff. She was walking briskly, appearing to be in some kind of hurry or agitation. Thomas had seen the Queen Consort many times before during his service, but today something seemed different about her demeanor. She appeared stressed or upset about something, which was unusual for the normally composed royal. As Queen Camilla drew closer to where Thomas was stationed, he could hear fragments of a heated conversation she was having with one of her assistants. Something about a scheduled event running late, problems with arrangements, and frustration about various complications that had arisen that morning. Her voice carried more tension than Thomas had ever heard before during his time at the castle. When Queen Camilla reached the area directly in front of Thomas, she suddenly stopped walking. Her assistant had just informed her about another delay in her schedule, and Thomas could see the frustration building in her expression. The small group of staff members around her seemed nervous, unsure of how to handle their clearly agitated employer. The atmosphere became thick with tension as everyone waited to see what would happen next. Thomas remained perfectly still in his position, as he had been trained to do regardless of any circumstances around him. His eyes stayed focused straight ahead, his breathing remained steady and controlled. Years of training had prepared him to maintain his composure even in unexpected situations, though nothing had quite prepared him for what was about to unfold in the next few moments. Queen Camilla turned toward Thomas, her frustration from the morning's complications apparently reaching a boiling point. The stress of her demanding schedule, combined with the various problems that had been piling up throughout the day, seemed to culminate in this moment. Her staff members exchanged worried glances, sensing that something was about to happen that might not reflect well on anyone involved. "You there," Queen Camilla said sharply, her voice cutting through the morning air like a blade. "Are you completely useless, or are you just pretending to be a decoration? Do you have any idea how ridiculous you look standing there like some kind of toy soldier while real work needs to be done around here?" The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Several tourists nearby stopped their conversations and turned to look at what was happening. The staff members accompanying Queen Camilla appeared shocked by her outburst, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the confrontation was taking. Some visitors began pulling out their phones, sensing that they might be witnessing something extraordinary. Thomas felt the words hit him like physical blows, but his training held firm. He maintained his position, his expression unchanged, though inside he was processing the completely unexpected nature of this verbal attack. In all his years of service, through countless interactions with members of the royal family, nothing like this had ever happened. The criticism felt particularly sharp because it questioned not just his presence, but the very nature of his service and sacrifice. "Look at me when I'm speaking to you," Queen Camilla continued, her voice rising with apparent anger. "Do you think this is some kind of game? Standing around in that ridiculous costume while taxpayers fund your pointless existence? What exactly do you contribute to anything meaningful happening in this country?" The crowd of onlookers was growing larger now, with more people stopping to witness this unprecedented scene. Some were recording with their phones, while others simply stood in stunned silence, unable to believe what they were seeing. The tension in the air was palpable as everyone waited to see how this confrontation would resolve itself. Thomas could feel the eyes of dozens of people on him, waiting to see how he would respond to this very public dressing down from a member of the royal family. His military training told him to maintain his position and remain silent, but something deeper inside him was stirring. This was not just about him anymore, it was about every guard who had ever stood in this position, every soldier who had ever served their country with honor and dignity. The moment stretched on, with Queen Camilla apparently waiting for some kind of reaction or response from Thomas. Her staff members looked increasingly uncomfortable, some beginning to step forward as if to intervene, but uncertain about how to handle such an unprecedented situation. The morning sun continued to shine down on the scene, casting long shadows across the castle grounds as history was about to be made in the most unexpected way. Thomas took a slow, deliberate breath, feeling the weight of generations of military tradition on his shoulders. He thought about his father and grandfather, about the pride they had taken in their service, about the meaning behind the uniform he wore. He thought about his mother working those double shifts, about his sisters studying hard to make something of themselves, about all the sacrifices his family had made to support his chosen path of service. In that moment, Thomas Mitchell realized that sometimes maintaining dignity and honor required more than just standing silently. Sometimes it required finding the courage to speak truth to power, even when that power wore a crown. The young guard was about to make a decision that would change not just his own life, but capture the attention and admiration of an entire nation. Thomas Mitchell slowly turned his head toward Queen Camilla, breaking the most fundamental rule of his position as a Queen's Guard. The movement was deliberate and controlled, not a sudden jerk of anger or impulse, but a measured response that carried the weight of careful consideration. His blue eyes met hers directly, and, for a moment, the entire world seemed to pause as everyone present realized they were witnessing something that had never happened before in the long history of the Royal Guards. "Your Majesty," Thomas said in a clear, steady voice that carried across the castle grounds, "with the greatest respect for the crown and your position, I must respectfully disagree with your assessment of my service and the service of every guard who has stood in this position before me." The collective gasp from the crowd was audible. Queen Camilla's eyes widened in apparent shock, clearly not expecting any response at all, much less one delivered with such calm dignity. Her staff members froze in place, unsure whether to intervene or simply watch this unprecedented exchange unfold. Several tourists continued recording, sensing that they were capturing a moment that would be discussed and analyzed for years to come. Thomas continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "This uniform that you call a costume represents something far more meaningful than decoration. It represents the sacrifice of generations of men and women who have dedicated their lives to serving this country and protecting the institution that you represent. My grandfather wore this uniform during World War II, standing guard even as bombs fell on London. My father wore it for 25 years, missing countless family dinners, holidays, and important moments with his children because his duty came first." Queen Camilla appeared stunned by the eloquence and passion in Thomas's response. The anger that had been building in her expression began to give way to something else, perhaps surprise, or even a dawning recognition that she had seriously misjudged both the man before her and the situation she had created. "I stand here today," Thomas continued, "not because I enjoy being stared at by tourists or because I think this is an easy job that anyone can do. I stand here because I believe in service, in duty, in the idea that some things are more important than personal comfort or recognition. Every guard in this position undergoes months of rigorous training, not just in military protocol, but in discipline, respect, and the honor that comes with representing something larger than ourselves. The crowd around them had grown significantly larger, with castle staff, tourists, and even some local residents drawn by the commotion. Many were still recording the exchange, while others simply listened in rapt attention to words that were cutting through years of assumptions about the silent guards they saw as merely ceremonial figures. "You asked what I contribute to this country," Thomas said, his voice carrying a note of pride that was impossible to miss. "I contribute my dedication, my willingness to stand in all weather, at all hours, ready to protect and serve. I contribute my commitment to excellence, to maintaining the highest standards even when no one is watching. I contribute my respect for tradition and history, understanding that some things are worth preserving not because they are easy or profitable, but because they represent the best of who we can be as a people." Queen Camilla's staff members were exchanging increasingly worried glances, clearly concerned about how this public confrontation would be perceived and what consequences might follow. Some appeared ready to step in and end the exchange, but something about the dignity and respect in Thomas's tone seemed to hold them back from interfering with what had become a moment of genuine human connection. Thomas's voice grew more personal as he continued. "My mother is a nurse who works double shifts to support our family. She has never once complained about the long hours I spend in service to the crown, because she understands that honor and duty are not measured by immediate financial reward or personal convenience. My two sisters are studying at university, inspired by our family's tradition of service, planning to contribute to this country in their own ways as teachers and doctors." The young guard paused for a moment, allowing his words to settle in the morning air. Around them, the castle grounds had become unusually quiet, as if even the birds and wind were listening to this unprecedented exchange. Queen Camilla remained silent, her expression having transformed from anger to something more complex and thoughtful. "When people from around the world come to see the Queen's Guards," Thomas continued, "they are not just looking at men in unusual uniforms. They are witnessing a living symbol of dedication, of the willingness to put duty before personal desires, of the kind of service that holds societies together even when times are difficult. Every tourist who takes a photograph here goes home with a story about British tradition, about people who care enough about something to stand perfectly still for hours, maintaining standards that many would consider impossible." Thomas could see that his words were having an impact not just on Queen Camilla, but on everyone within hearing distance. Several tourists were nodding in recognition, perhaps understanding for the first time the human dedication behind the ceremonial role they had come to witness. The moment was becoming something larger than a confrontation between two individuals. It was becoming a teaching moment about respect, service, and the dignity inherent in any role performed with genuine commitment. "I do not expect thanks for my service," Thomas said, his voice softening slightly but maintaining its strength. "That is not why any of us choose this path. But I do expect the basic respect that should be afforded to anyone who dedicates their life to something greater than personal gain. Every person who serves in uniform, whether they are visible to the public or working behind the scenes, deserves to be seen as a human being with value, purpose, and dignity." The transformation in Queen Camilla's expression was becoming more apparent with each passing moment. The anger and frustration that had marked her earlier outburst seemed to be giving way to something approaching recognition, perhaps even embarrassment about her behavior. Her staff members were watching her carefully, trying to gauge how she might respond to this unprecedented challenge to royal authority. "You speak of taxpayers funding our existence," Thomas continued, his tone remaining respectful but firm. "Every guard here pays taxes too. We contribute to the same system that employs us, and we do so gladly because we believe in the importance of the institution we serve. We are not separate from the people of this country, we are part of them, chosen to represent their best qualities through our dedication and service." Thomas straightened his posture even further, if that were possible, embodying the very pride and dignity he was defending. "This position teaches us patience, endurance, attention to detail, and respect for others. These are qualities that serve us well in every aspect of our lives and make us better citizens, better family members, and better representatives of British values wherever we go." The crowd around them seemed to sense that they were witnessing the climax of something important. The silence was almost complete now, broken only by the distant sounds of London traffic and the soft whisper of wine through the castle grounds. Queen Camilla stood facing Thomas, apparently processing not just his words but the dignity and courage with which he had delivered them. "Your Majesty," Thomas concluded, "I hope you will forgive my breaking protocol to address you directly, but sometimes silence can be mistaken for acceptance of treatment that diminishes not just individuals, but the very institution we all serve in our different ways. I remain, as always, your humble and dedicated servant, committed to upholding the honor of the crown through my service, regardless of recognition or understanding." With those words, Thomas slowly turned his head back to the forward position, resuming his traditional stance as if nothing had happened, though everything had changed. The crowd remained frozen in place, processing what they had just witnessed, while Queen Camilla continued to stare at the young guard who had just delivered one of the most dignified and powerful responses to authority that anyone present had ever heard. The silence that followed Thomas's return to his guard position seemed to stretch forever. Queen Camilla remained standing before him, her expression cycling through what appeared to be genuine surprise, contemplation, and, perhaps, the beginning of remorse. The dozens of onlookers held their collective breath, waiting to see how the queen consort would respond to being addressed so directly and eloquently by someone who was supposed to remain silent and motionless. For nearly 2 full minutes, Queen Camilla simply stared at Thomas, who had resumed his perfect guard stance as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. Her staff members shifted nervously, clearly uncertain about how to handle this unprecedented situation. Some appeared ready to escort her away from the scene, while others seemed fascinated by the unfolding drama, perhaps recognizing that they were witnessing a moment that would be remembered and discussed for years to come. Finally, Queen Camilla took a step closer to Thomas. Her voice, when she spoke, was much quieter than it had been during her initial outburst, carrying a tone that many in the crowd recognized as genuinely thoughtful rather than angry or defensive. "Young man," she said softly, "please look at me again." Thomas hesitated for just a moment before once again breaking protocol to meet her eyes. This time, there was no anger in her expression, no frustration or irritation. Instead, there was something that looked remarkably like respect, mixed with what might have been embarrassment about her earlier behavior. "What is your name?" Queen Camilla asked, her voice carrying a warmth that had been completely absent during their first exchange. "Guard Thomas Mitchell, Your Majesty," he replied, maintaining his respectful tone despite the dramatic shift in her demeanor. "Thomas Mitchell," she repeated, as if committing the name to memory. "How long have you been serving as a Queen's Guard?" 3 years, Your Majesty, following my father Robert Mitchell, who served for 25 years, and my grandfather William Mitchell, who served during the Second World War." Queen Camilla nodded slowly, and several people in the crowd could see what appeared to be genuine recognition dawning in her expression. She was beginning to understand not just who Thomas was, but what he represented, a living link to generations of dedicated service, a young man carrying forward a family tradition of honor and sacrifice. "Thomas," Queen Camilla said, using his first name in a way that surprised everyone present, "I owe you an apology. I owe you an apology that should be heard by everyone who witnessed my earlier words." The crowd stirred with surprise at this unexpected turn of events. Several tourists adjusted their positions to better record what was happening, sensing that this apology might be as historically significant as the confrontation that had prompted it. Queen Camilla turned slightly to address not just Thomas, but the gathered crowd of onlookers. Her voice carried clearly across the castle grounds as she spoke words that would soon be shared around the world through social media and news reports. "I want everyone here to understand that my earlier behavior was completely inappropriate and unworthy of my position," she said, her voice steady and clear. "Guard Mitchell's response has reminded me of something I should never have forgotten, that every person who serves in uniform, whether they are visible to the public or working behind the scenes, deserves our deepest respect and gratitude." She turned back to face Thomas directly. "Your words about service, about family tradition, about the meaning behind your uniform, they have taught me something important today. You have reminded me that true nobility comes not from titles or position, but from dedication, dignity, and the courage to stand up for what is right, even when it is difficult to do so." Thomas maintained his respectful attention, though many in the crowd could see that he was moved by the sincerity in her voice. The transformation in Queen Camilla's demeanor was remarkable, as if her encounter with Thomas had stripped away whatever frustration and stress had been driving her earlier behavior, leaving behind a more genuine and thoughtful person. "You mentioned your mother, who works as a nurse," Queen Camilla continued. "Healthcare workers like your mother are the backbone of our society, and families like yours, who understand the value of service and sacrifice, are what make this country strong. Your grandfather's service during the war, your father's dedication, your own commitment, this is a legacy that deserves celebration, not criticism. The crowd was listening with rapt attention now, many clearly moved by what they were witnessing. This was no longer just a confrontation or even an apology, it was becoming a moment of genuine human connection that transcended the usual boundaries between royalty and commoners. Thomas, Queen Camilla said, "Would you be willing to accept my personal invitation to bring your family, your mother, your father, and your sisters, to a private tea at the palace? I would very much like to meet the people who raised such a remarkable young man, and to express my gratitude for their service to this country in their own ways." The offer clearly surprised Thomas, and, for a moment, his perfect composure cracked slightly as he processed this unexpected honor. Several people in the crowd gasped audibly, recognizing the extraordinary nature of such a personal invitation from a member of the royal family. "Your Majesty," Thomas replied, his voice carrying a note of genuine emotion for the first time during the exchange, "my family would be deeply honored by such an invitation. We have always served with pride, never expecting recognition, but such kindness would mean more to us than I can adequately express." Queen Camilla smiled then, the first genuine smile anyone had seen from her since the entire incident began. "The honor would be mine, Thomas. Today you have reminded me what true service looks like, and you have done so with a dignity and respect that exemplifies the very best of British character." She paused for a moment before continuing. "I also want to arrange for a formal commendation to be added to your service record. Your response today demonstrated not just personal courage, but a deep understanding of duty and honor that deserves official recognition. Every guard who serves alongside you should know that your example today has enhanced the reputation of the Queen's Guard throughout the entire Commonwealth." The crowd around them had grown even larger during this exchange, with castle staff, local residents, and tourists all drawn by word of mouth about the extraordinary scene unfolding on the castle grounds. Many were recording the apology and invitation, understanding that they were witnessing something that would be talked about for generations. Furthermore, Queen Camilla added, "I want to arrange for a special ceremony where you and other guards can share the stories of your service with school children and visitors. Too many people see you as silent decorations, as you so eloquently pointed out. They should understand the real people behind the uniforms, the families and traditions and sacrifices that make your service possible." Thomas nodded his understanding, clearly moved by the comprehensive nature of her response to their confrontation. What had begun as a moment of public embarrassment was transforming into an opportunity for education, recognition, and genuine positive change. "Your Majesty," Thomas said, "if I may suggest, perhaps such a program could include all the service members who work here, not just the guards who are visible to the public, but the security personnel, the maintenance staff, the administrators who all contribute to keeping this institution functioning smoothly. Every person who works here has chosen service over more lucrative opportunities in the private sector." Queen Camilla's smile grew wider at this suggestion. "An excellent idea, Thomas. You see not just your own worth, but the worth of everyone around you. That is true leadership, and it is exactly the kind of perspective that this institution needs more of." She gestured toward her staff members, who had been watching this exchange with growing amazement. "I want you to work with my staff to arrange not just the tea for Thomas's family, but the commendation ceremony and the educational program he has suggested. This is going to be a priority for my office going forward." The atmosphere on the castle grounds had completely transformed from the tension and awkwardness of the morning's beginning. What had started as a confrontation born from stress and frustration had become a moment of genuine connection, understanding, and positive change that would benefit not just Thomas, but potentially thousands of service members and visitors in the future. Within hours of the confrontation, videos of Thomas Mitchell's remarkable response to Queen Camilla had spread across social media platforms worldwide. The footage captured not just the exchange itself, but the dignity and eloquence with which the young guard had defended his service and that of his colleagues. News outlets from Britain to Australia, from America to India, were running stories about the guard who had found the courage to speak truth to power while maintaining perfect respect and composure. Thomas himself was unaware of this growing media storm as he completed his shift that afternoon. Royal protocol required that guards remain disconnected from personal communication devices while on duty, so he had no idea that his name was trending on Twitter, that news anchors were discussing his words on television, or that his defense of military service was being shared and praised by millions of people around the world. When Thomas finally returned to his quarters that evening, he was immediately surrounded by fellow guards who had been following the story throughout the day. His closest friend among the guards, David Thompson, pulled him aside with a mixture of excitement and concern. "Thomas, mate, you need to see this," David said, handing him a phone displaying news coverage from the BBC. "You're all over the news. The whole world is talking about what you did today." Thomas watched in amazement as he saw footage of himself speaking to Queen Camilla, followed by commentary from news presenters discussing the significance of his words. The coverage was overwhelmingly positive, with commentators praising his articulate defense of military service and the respectful way he had challenged inappropriate behavior from a member of the royal family. "Listen to this," David continued, scrolling through social media responses. "Veterans from around the world are sharing your video and talking about how you spoke for everyone who has ever worn a uniform. Teachers are saying they want to show your response in their classes as an example of dignity under pressure. People are calling you a hero." Thomas felt overwhelmed by the scope of the response. He had spoken from the heart in that moment, defending principles and values that were important to him, but he had never imagined that his words would reach beyond the immediate audience on the castle grounds. Later that evening, Thomas received a phone call that would change his perspective even further. His mother Sarah was on the line, her voice filled with emotion as she spoke about the coverage she had been seeing throughout the day. "Thomas, love," she said, clearly struggling to control her tears, "your father and I have been watching the news all day. We are so proud of you we can barely speak. The way you stood up for yourself, for your grandfather's memory, for all of us, it was beautiful, son. Absolutely beautiful." "Mom," Thomas replied, still processing everything that had happened, "I just said what needed to be said. I couldn't let her disrespect what Dad and Granddad stood for." "That's exactly why we're so proud," Sarah continued. "You didn't lose your temper, you didn't show disrespect, but you didn't let yourself be diminished either. Your grandfather would have been bursting with pride if he could have heard you today." Thomas's father Robert came on the phone then, his voice carrying the emotional weight of a man who had dedicated his life to the same service his son was now defending. "Son, in all my years wearing that uniform, I never found the words to explain what it really meant like you did today. You spoke for every guard who ever stood in that position, every soldier who ever wondered if their sacrifice mattered. You gave voice to things that needed to be said." The conversation with his parents helped Thomas understand the true impact of what had occurred. This had not just been about one confrontation with one member of the royal family, it had become a moment of recognition for the value of service and dedication that extended far beyond the walls of Windsor Castle. Over the following days, Thomas received messages from fellow service members around the world. Veterans from conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan wrote to thank him for defending the honor of military service. Police officers, firefighters, and other public servants shared their own experiences of feeling undervalued or misunderstood, expressing gratitude that someone had found such eloquent words to defend the principle of service to others. A particularly moving letter came from an elderly veteran named Frank Harrison, who had served during the Falklands War. His handwriting was shaky, but his words were powerful. "Young man, you said in 5 minutes what I have been trying to explain to my grandchildren for years. Service is not about recognition or thanks, it is about being part of something larger than yourself. You have reminded an entire generation why that matters." The educational program that Queen Camilla had promised began taking shape remarkably quickly. Her staff contacted Thomas within a week to discuss the details of the initiative, which would include regular presentations by guards and other castle staff members for visiting school groups and tourists. The program would focus on the real people behind the ceremonial roles, the training and dedication required for their positions, and the historical significance of their service. Thomas found himself working with educational specialists to develop content that would be both informative and engaging for different age groups. They created presentations that explained the rigorous selection process for Queen's Guards, the months of training required, and the physical and mental discipline needed to maintain their positions. They also developed materials that connected current service to historical traditions, helping visitors understand the continuity between guards who had served during times of war and those who served during times of peace. The response from early school groups was enthusiastic and moving. Children who had previously seen the guards as living statues began asking thoughtful questions about their training, their families, and their experiences. Teachers reported that students were inspired by the idea of service and dedication, with many expressing interest in learning more about military careers or other forms of public service. One particularly memorable visit involved a group of students from a school in Manchester, not far from where Thomas had grown up. A young boy named Jamie, who reminded Thomas of himself at that age, asked whether being a guard was scary or lonely. Thomas's honest answer about the challenges and rewards of the position clearly made an impression on the entire group. "Sometimes it is lonely," Thomas told the children, "but you are never really alone when you are part of something bigger than yourself. Every guard here is part of a team, and we are all part of a tradition that connects us to everyone who came before us and everyone who will come after us." The formal commendation ceremony that Queen Camilla had promised took place on a crisp autumn morning 6 weeks after their initial confrontation. Thomas's entire family was present, along with fellow guards, castle staff, and a small group of invited guests including veterans and community leaders. Queen Camilla presented Thomas with a special recognition that would become part of his permanent service record. In her remarks during the ceremony, Queen Camilla reflected on the lesson she had learned from their encounter. "Thomas Mitchell taught me that true nobility comes from character, not from position," she said. "His response to my inappropriate behavior demonstrated qualities of leadership, dignity, and courage that we should all aspire to embody, regardless of our roles in life." The ceremony was also attended by representatives from military organizations throughout the Commonwealth, who had requested permission to be present as recognition of the broader impact Thomas's words had achieved. Several expressed interest in sharing his story within their own organizations as an example of how to maintain dignity and professionalism even in challenging circumstances. Following the ceremony, the private tea that Queen Camilla had offered took place in her personal quarters. Thomas was struck by how different she seemed in this more intimate setting, warm, thoughtful, and genuinely interested in learning about his family's experiences. She spent considerable time talking with his mother about her work as a nurse, with his father about his years of service, and with his sisters about their studies and career plans. "Your son has taught me something very important about leadership," she told Thomas's parents. "Real leadership sometimes means having the courage to admit when you are wrong and to learn from those around you, regardless of their position or status." Thomas demonstrated more wisdom in those few minutes than I had shown in years of experience. The tea lasted much longer than originally planned, with Queen Camilla clearly enjoying the opportunity to connect with people who represented the kind of dedicated service that formed the backbone of British society. She asked detailed questions about the challenges facing military families, the support systems available to service members, and the ways the royal family could better recognize and support those who served in various capacities. "Give me all parts individually and write in documents ISCO expand CRO without heading 3,500 words my in simple English words. It should be interesting, and every part should be engaging so the audience know."